Hey guys, my name's Jason with Mount Baker Mining and Metals, and on today's video, I'm going to do a little bit of experiment. I'm going to try the Parks process, which is a way to remove silver from lead bullion. And the reason I want to try out the Parks process is I got a chance to get some galena from Cerro Gordo down in California, and I'm working on getting the silver out, and I'm going to send the silver back down to Brent there, and he's going to make a little charm out of it. So let's get started. We'll see if I can make this thing go, just playing around with some silver and some lead. So the first thing we're going to do is I have some silver here from one of my other projects, and it's about 16 grams. I have also weighed out this roofing lead, which weighs about 3,300 grams, so 3.3 kilos. And I'm going to melt this stuff down, and I'm going to alloy the silver in with the lead, and that's going to be about twice as much silver as is in the Cerro Gordo stuff. The Cerro Gordo stuff has about 5,000 grams a metric ton, and this stuff's going to be about 10,000 grams a metric ton. And so I want to see if I can recover this first before I try the Cerro Gordo stuff. So let's get this lead and silver melted down in this crucible, and then we'll pour it into our cone mold. We'll get our lead out, our lead-silver alloy at that point, and then we'll move on to the Parks process. It's over here behind me in this crucible. And it alloyed with the silver. The silver alloyed into the lead at a much lower temperature than the melting point of silver. It was about 13 or 1400 degrees. And so I'm going to let the lead cool down to about 800 degrees Fahrenheit before I pour it into my cone mold so it doesn't bond with the steel cone mold. And I'll scrape off some of the oxides as well before I pour it. But we got our lead and silver alloy, our lead bullion there. At this point, we're essentially where we're going to be when we smelt down some of the Cerro Gordo lead-silver ore and get a lead bullion. So now we'll take our lead out of our cone mold and we'll refine it down with the Parks process. I've been coating my cone mold with WD-40, and I guess I had a little puddle at the bottom. It splattered lead out everywhere, but we'll let that get cooled down into a solid mass, and then we'll work on getting the silver out. Okay, here is our lead. we go. Now, I'm going to take our lead. Oh, man, it's so heavy. I'm going to put it in this stainless steel bowl. And the trick here is going to be not to get it too hot. I don't want to get it so hot that it fuses to the stainless or I start corroding the stainless. So I'm going to turn the burner back on, get that lead up to kind of just the melting point, and then I'll use my thermometer and we'll measure the temperature. All right, so how the Parks process works, lead and zinc are immiscible, which means they don't alloy. They're like oil and water, so they separate really easily. You can't mix them together when they're molten. And gold and silver are much happier alloyed with zinc than lead, like 200 or 300 times a better alloy, I guess, is what you'd call it. And so when you take zinc, which also has a fairly low melting point, and add it to lead, the silver that's in the lead will alloy with the zinc and form a zinc-silver crust on top. That's the theory. And all the silver gets absorbed into the zinc, it floats on top, and I get to skim off the zinc-silver crust. And if there's any gold, that would also come up as well, but right now we're just playing with silver. And so the ratio is, apparently, from the old books I've been reading, you take about 1% zinc by weight, which for us is going to be about 35 grams. You get the lead bullion up to about, metric, 450 or so Celsius, or 900 degrees Fahrenheit, so the zinc will melt. And then for a little while, I don't know how long, you just stir the lead puddle, the lead bullion, and you get the zinc really mixed in really well. And then you very, very slowly cool down the alloy, and the zinc-silver crust floats on top. And I will skim that off and save that because that's where all the silver is. Well, I've got my little skimmer, and this process has been going about 10 minutes. Try and film and do this at the same time, but when I first added the zinc and got it stirred in, a whole bunch of junk came to the top, and I skimmed it off, and I mean, it was a lot. And now I stir it around, and there's not much going on. My furnace is falling in there. And so I don't know if I'm just skimming off oxides now or what, but you can see I got a pile of stuff skimmed there. So I'll do this another, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 minutes maybe. And then I'll shut it off. I'm going to pour the zinc or the lead out of that bowl just so it doesn't stick in there. Okay, well, I've got my desilvered lead here. It weighs a little more than 2 kilograms, maybe 2,100 grams. And then I've got my skimmings here, my silver skimmings. And they weigh, if you take off the bowl, they weigh about 700 grams. And then I probably lost 300 or 400 grams there because of the lead oxides and skimming and, screwing around. So I think we've got pretty much everything accounted for, but I've got just an absolute ton of stuff here. Because like I said, I only added 30 grams of silver, 16 grams of silver and 35 grams of zinc. So I've got hundreds and hundreds of grams of lead here that I don't really need. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it back in the crucible. I'm going to melt it down. And if I did actually get a bunch of zinc in here, I'll see the zinc fumes coming off in the furnace. So let's get this back in the crucible and melt it down, and then we can at least pour it. We'll get a bullion, I guess, or a big button. And then I can maybe think about putting it in a Cupel or something and getting the silver back out. All right, so what I did, I kind of figured out a little hack here. I took my skimmings and I put them back in the crucible and I just poured off the liquid lead that was underneath because I skimmed off a bunch of lead. So that's just the lead. And then over here, I hope, is all our zinc and our silver, and then whatever lead oxide is left over. But now we just got to deal with that little bit. I got all that out of the way. So let me figure out how to deal with this stuff. All right, here's the lead that I poured off the bottom of our skimmings there. Oh yeah, see, so we got another 500 grams of lead out. So now we've got our roughly 2.7 grams of lead. We should have 100, maybe more grams of skimmings, and then whatever we lost of the oxides, and I mean some stuck in the bowl and stuff. But that little bit of stuff over there in the pan is way easier to deal with than having an extra 500 grams of lead in there. All right, I just got this stuff weighed, and it weighs 200 grams, and you can actually see there's still a bunch of lead in there, at least 100 grams. So somewhere at the end of this process, we're going to have to do a cupellation. But when they did it back in the day, the Parks process, they would take the zinc skimmings and they would vaporize them. They'd heat them up really hot and the zinc would burn off, leaving the silver and whatever lead. And I'm going to try something different. I don't want to necessarily burn off all that zinc into the atmosphere. So I'm going to try putting a little bit of this in some muriatic acid, which is just HCl, and see if I can dissolve the zinc and leave the lead and the silver, whatever's left of the silver, and then we can Cupel that away. All right, I got a few little pieces in there. I'm just adding muriatic acid, and we'll see if we get any sort of reaction at all. It's fizzing a little bit there, but not a whole lot. I was hoping for something like this. This is a piece of zinc. See that? It just goes to town on the zinc. But my other pieces aren't really reacting very well. I mean, it's fuzzing a little bit, I guess. I'll leave them in there for a little while and see what happens. Well, I'm committed now, I guess. I just poured it all in there and added a bunch of acid. So we're going to let that sit till it stops fuzzing, and then we'll figure out what we got. We started with about 200 grams, if I remember right, 205, 210, somewhere there. And like I said earlier, we added 35 grams or so of zinc. So if we can eat up all our zinc with acid, we should be left with 170, 180 grams. Here's our zinc and our acid, and it sat overnight. And I don't know. We'll decant that stuff off the top. We'll filter it down and see what we get. All right, well, now I'm going to make a Cupel, and this is just Portland cement. I'm going to mix a little bit of water in here and then just mold it onto this fire brick and make a Cupel that we can reuse in our furnace. And sometimes I've used pre-made Cupels with magnesium oxide, but for this one, because it's got the zinc and it's pretty good size, I'm going to make my own Cupel out of Portland cement. I've added just a little bit of water so it can kind of stick together. And now I'm just going to mold this into a little dish shape here. So I found an old mouse, and I'm just going to use that to make a little depression. Because you want it concave, but not very much. You want to have it so as much of the lead gets exposed to the oxygen as you can. And so the shallow concave shape of this mouse is going to work pretty good, I think. Okay, hope that works. We'll put it in our furnace, get it dried out, and then we'll put our stuff in there. All right, guys, so a couple of things. I got our lead zinc stuff in our Cupel. It's going. And when I first had the puddle molten, I kept drossing the surface because I thought there was a bunch of zinc oxides on the surface. And if you get a thin layer of oxides in the surface, it prevents the lead surface from becoming oxidized and going into the Cupel. It provides a little shield kind of for the lead puddle, and it'll just sit there in the heat and won't oxidize. So I started scraping that off, scraping, and I kept scraping forever. And then I realized that the temperature was just a little bit too low. It was about 1600 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's a little bit under the melting point of lead oxide. So a couple of things to remember. If you're doing this, make sure it gets up to a nice hot temperature, somewhere around 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, and it'll probably have a little skin of oxides on it when you first start. And I just take a little spoon and I skim those off. And once you get the lead exposed, it'll start oxidizing the lead, and then it'll start flowing into the Cupel. So those are just some of the things I've learned starting out here, but we got the process going. I got my lead Cupelling, and hopefully we'll end up with a nice little silver bead here at the end. So there it is. It's cooled down some, and I'll pull it out of there. We'll take a look. Well, I'll be the first to admit that was some pretty sloppy Cupelling, because you can see down in here I got little silver beads all over the place. There's one there, one back in here. So I think, what happened was as I was scraping that initial skin of dross and zinc and whatever off, I pulled some lead in. It sat here, finally got hot enough to for the lead oxides to melt, and then it kind of did its own Cupelling thing over here in its own little pockets. Wouldn't be surprised if some actually ran off the edge here. So I got to let this cool down some, but then I'll pick out all the little beads that I can. I mean, we got a pretty nice little button there. So I'm actually, other than the kind of the sloppy Cupelling, I'm ecstatic. I think it worked fantastic. We'll have to get a weight on some of the beads, but I think I recovered a huge percentage of the silver I put in. And for my first time trying it out, I think it worked great. But like I say, let me get it cooled down, pick some of this silver out. We'll get it all weighed up and see how well we did. So I got most of the beads out of there and crushed up some of the slag and the cement and picked out, there's our big one and then a bunch of these smaller beads. So let's get them weighed, see how much we recovered. Okay, we started with about 16. Let me get all our silver beads here. 7.5. Well, maybe I'm not as ecstatic as I was because we lost about half of the silver. Well, the Parks process kind of works for us. Like I said, we only recovered about half our silver, and it being the first time, there's a lot of things I would do different. First thing, I wouldn't do anything with the acids. I'd just get rid of that whole step. I don't think that helped us at all. Probably made it more complicated because it was wet. I had to deal with some wet stuff. Reading in the old books, it talks about they stirred that lead and zinc for a long time. If there's any contamination metals in there, such as copper or antimony or arsenic, it really kind of poisons the process and makes it hard for the silver to go into solution with the zinc. And one of the ways to prevent that is through the softening process. They would take the lead before they added the zinc, and they would heat it up, liquid, and expose it to air and stir it, get everything mixed up, and then they would dross off. A lot of those metals would come to the surface and they could dross off the oxides that formed because they were more, it was easier for the copper and the arsenic and stuff to form oxides than the lead. So I didn't do that process very much. There could be some contamination there. And in the Cupelling process, you know, it was a little bit of a problem with the skimming, and my Cupel kind of fell apart there a little bit. But all that being said, it for the first time, I think it went pretty good. I mean, we recovered some of our silver. We put a bunch of lead in there, a little bit of silver, and we recovered most of our silver, was half of our silver. So I think for the first pass it went well. A couple things I'd do next time to improve the process, but I think we're getting closer and closer to getting some of that Cerro Gordo silver out for Brent. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys have any suggestions on what I would do differently or better or help improve the process, please let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next video.